Hi, welcome everybody. This is Joe Gelb. Thank you, Herzl. As Herzl mentioned, Yehudit will be joining me for this webinar. Yehudit is one of our prime project managers here at Suite Solutions. As Suite Solutions, our vision is enable you to engage your customers by providing quick access to relevant information. Basically what that means in a nutshell is that we're going to be talking a lot about details of style sheets and formatting and all the other stuff, but at the end of the day, the real goal is to give your customers access to good information, relevant information, effective information, well-formatted information, and that's really the end goal that we're going to be talking about. And all the nitty-gritty, you have to always kind of keep in mind that the end goal is to provide good information. DITA provides that foundation. A lot of you are already using DITA, maybe even all of you, and we'll be talking, or you're considering it. So XML provides that foundation to publish that content into useful, effective information. We help companies get it right the first time based on our publishing and authoring solutions, enterprise and dynamic content, consultancy, etc. We have a large breadth of different types of customers in different industries, which has enabled us really to bring together these webinars and our experience and help you leverage our experience to have successful implementations for yourselves. So the main topics of this webinar, we'll talk about the goals, first of all. We'll talk about the magic button, what we're all getting to. We'll talk about common requirements for some various outputs, and we'll talk about some localization. At the end, hopefully, we'll get to some case studies.
The goals of this webinar, we have several goals, but the primary goal is that we really want to empower you and not overwhelm you. We're going to give you a lot of information, but we're going to try and put it in such a way that it doesn't feel overwhelming. We want to help you understand the process, the details, and the dependencies involved, understand what are the possibilities that you have. We want to help you avoid making assumptions. You want to not necessarily think that one thing is always going to be true, because in fact that's almost never true. And we want to help you manage your own expectations and your clients' expectations. The key components of a DITA solution, as you know, we discussed part of this in some of our other webinars, are the staff that you need, the content that you need, the translation of the content, publishing, and content and configuration management. And of course, your mission is to develop or acquire each of them. Right now in this webinar, we're going to be focusing primarily on publishing.
So I'd like to talk about the magic button. And there's a lot of common misconceptions about DITA, and we've heard this often, that we've heard DITA publishing can't match the quality and complexity of desktop publishing like InDesign or FrameMaker. You lose control over the final output and lose control of those last-minute tweaks and page breaks. But the reality is that pretty much anything we've seen from a requirement standpoint can be done using DITA publishing. The style sheets can be customized, parameterized, localized to a high degree to really meet pretty much any requirement you can throw at it. So the CMS, your content management system, if you're using one, plus your style sheets gives you that magic button, that automated formatting, that automated publishing, so that any format in any language for any device can be coming out of your tool set and into the hands of your customers in any format that they need. The thing is, that easy magic button isn't so easy at first. It takes a lot of effort to set all that up. We're going to be talking about that today as far as requirements and getting your project up and running. But the idea is once all this work, upfront work is done and an investment, then it really becomes easy for you to publish all your content into whatever output you need in whatever format you need. So when you talk about multi-purpose publishing, we're talking about single sourcing, many outputs, whether we're talking about PDF, high fidelity, or for print versus online, data sheets, foldouts, all kinds of different types of outputs, of PDF outputs. We're talking about online help, whether it be HTML help or web help, the newer HTML5 formats for your websites, pushing out content to your knowledge base, the old style man pages for Unix or Linux. We're talking about mobile. Mobile is, you know, we talked a few years ago, people, the idea of mobile 3 or 4 years ago, the idea of mobile wasn't even in people's minds. When people talked about DITA being a format that you, or a platform really that you can create content that will be able to be published in any format, that might be dreamed up later on in the future. So we've seen this happening before our very eyes over the past few years. The mobile, whether it be EPUB and Nook and Mobi, or native apps, or all kinds of responsive design HTML5 applications or websites, that's something that's happened over the past few years, and it's still unfolding. InDesign, you can publish to InDesign, publishing to Word, and more and more we're hearing a request to integrate with other systems like Salesforce as a CRM for knowledge management people, integrating with collaboration systems like Jive for communities. So multi-purpose publishing is really very important, and the aspects of the publishing is continuing to unfold. Dynamic web publishing, content on demand, is also becoming more and more in being requested, and those platforms are becoming more stable and mature. So if we set or try to take a step back and show the structure of what the publishing, how the publishing works. So we start with the documentation instance, like an XML file or XML files, the media and graphic, and we combine that with our DTD, or the structural rules. The XML content is driven by the DTDs, your schema. That's the rules that say which tags you can use. The style sheets, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, are also driven by those DTDs, the structural rules, meaning the style sheets need to be able to interpret or translate, if you were, the structures and the rules that are set in the DTD for your XML and translate into a format. Now the presentation rules, the style sheets, there are a number of different kinds. We'll be talking about XSL, which is generally used for transforming into HTML. We'll talk about XSLFO, which is generally used for publishing to PDF. CSS is generally used for formatting HTML outputs. You can also actually use it for formatting HTML that will be driven to PDF. And there's also something called Shakespearean templates, which is a way of creating templates for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's something that the DITA Accelerator, a technology that we've been developing and using, is based on. And all of that comes together to form a presentation, your PDF files, your HTML files, EPUB, and all the other different types of formats we'll be talking about. Okay, so this is how everything fits together into your implementation. A typical DITA toolset would be your authoring tool. It would be often your content management system. Many of you may be just starting and may not have a CMS system, but I think most of our customers, and I think you'll find as well, as you get more content, certainly if you're going to be translating your content, you'll find that it'll be worthwhile to be implementing a content management system. These days the offerings are many. The prices have come down quite a bit. The toolset is quite a bit matured than a few years ago. It's really, pretty much anyone, if they want, they can afford a really good CMS system these days. The CMS generally pumps out content or publishes the content using the DITA Toolkit or DITA Accelerator to various formats, whether it be help, manuals, mobile, etc. And as I mentioned before, the idea of dynamic web, of having a system that knows how to consume your XML files as a source, have high-level filtering, and to be able to produce PDF and mobile on demand. That's becoming more and more asked for, and this becomes a big value add for a lot of organizations.
So the high-level process takes several steps to get through to that magic button result that we're looking for. The first thing you're going to need to do is figure out who is going to be on your team. And what you generally need is you need a project manager, somebody to go ahead and help with the scheduling and figure out the budget, things like that. You need an author who's familiar with the content and is going to be familiar with the markup. It's possible you're going to want a graphic designer involved to help you figure out the design, the layout, of which margins, how things are going to look. And it could even be that it's all one person doing all of that. The next thing up is building requirements. You want to stop and think, what outputs do you have now? Are you doing PDF, HTML, mobile? If you're doing PDF, do you have user manuals, instruction manuals, some of the things that Joe mentioned a couple slides ago, things like that. From that point, what do you want to add or change? Because if you know, as one of the things that you want to do is you want to increase support for, say, landscape, that's something that you're going to need to know ahead of time. You have an opportunity to put in the new format. So the people who are now asking for mobile output, this is a great opportunity to get involved with that. Information architecture. This is another part of the requirements in order to build the style sheets is to understand how your elements are being used. If you know that you're using a copy to element, we need to be able to support that through the style sheets. And we need to know what kinds of output you want. Solution architecture, also very important. Joe mentioned the CMS. Another thing, what kind of publishing tools you're using, what kind of editor you're using. All of these need to be able to integrate with the style sheets. The actual style sheet development needs to take place. Then it needs to be deployed into the CMS or onto the system that you're using. And then afterward, you need to make sure that you have a support system set up and understanding that you're going to want to probably make some tweaks as you start moving forward with the system. Be prepared. You're going to need to make nitty-gritty, detailed decisions. And when I say nitty-gritty, detailed, it's the kind of thing where you're going to have to look at things and say, do I want this many pixels or points of space between paragraphs, or do I want it to be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller? And if you have a lot of requirements and you have a very, very tight deadline, you may have to make some choices on priorities. You may have to do things in more than one step. You may have to decide, we're going to say, okay, these 15 things are highest priority for this release, and then we're going to set up another release for after that. It's really important to set out as many requirements before the development starts. If you don't do that, you can end up running into some scheduling or budget surprises, cost overruns, and even missing deadlines if you change too much midstream. When you need to identify the detailed formatting requirements for every format, you need to keep in mind that they're not all going to be the same. What you have set up for PDF is not going to be exactly the same as for HTML, for mobile, etc. You're going to need to coordinate with the information architect and your conversion team, because sometimes the style sheet developer says, hey, this is what it's going to look like if we do this, but if we're going to do this, you need to have this element set up, and this element being set up should come through your conversion. And all of that should be run by your information architect to make sure everything's running according to best practices. And you want to make sure that you're also communicating your clear and detailed, the more details the better, format and requirements to your vendor. Have the fonts available before you start the project. For some things, it's not going to be a big deal, but if you have any specialized fonts, you need to know ahead of time, and you need to have licenses before that starts, because again, that's going to cause things to run into issues if you don't have everything as prepared ahead of time as possible. Test data. You might have, let's say, 5 different manuals that you're used to publishing on a regular basis through PDF or help. And what you want to do is, it's worth it to take 2 or 3 of those and put them together for test data, just to make sure that you have a single set of all of the test elements that you can, so that it works in the best possible way for doing development and for testing. And the way your elements are used should be based on your information architecture that you figured out ahead of time. You want to simulate every combination of tagging and structure. If you know that you're going to have notes inside tables with footnotes, that should be included in your test documents. If you know that you're going to have figures inside of bulleted lists, inside of tasks, you want that kind of thing in your test content as well. And it should really be representative of the actual XML data that you're having exported from your CMS for publishing. When you're building the schedule for style sheet development, it's very important that you build proper amount of time for reviewing that. Whoever's doing the style sheets, if it's us, we generally recommend that you take a certain amount of time based on the amount of things that are being done, that are taken out to do the testing. If you know that you're going to have other things going on and you're not going to have time to do proper testing, it's better to lay that out ahead of time and say, hey, we need to allow more time for the testing than it is to do a quick review, because if you do a quick review, it's possible you may miss some issues. One of the things that we do during this webinar is we have some reality checks, just some things to keep in mind when we're giving a whole list of information. These are some things to just remember to keep on the top of your head when you're going through this. One of them is the job is not finished until you can publish real content from the CMS. That is, your style sheet developer may send you a PDF or a set of help output just for you to be able to review. But until you can take your content in your CMS with the style sheets and publish it out, then the job isn't finished. The best practice is that for even beta testing, that you already have your converted content in your CMS, because the way the style sheets work with the CMS to produce the content takes some very specific specializations. Localized style sheets, they can't be completed until we actually have real translated content. The style sheet developer can go ahead and make all of the rules and say this is going to be localized in this way and X is going to be localized in a different way, but until you actually have real translated content, it's very difficult to do proper testing. I mentioned this a second ago, but I'll mention it again. It's very important. When you have a budget set up for both time and financial budget, you want to make sure that you leave some of that left over at the end, or you set aside a specific amount for making certain changes and small tweaks after you think the project is over, because inevitably you will find something later that you want to add or change or possibly that got missed. As you migrate more content from wherever your normal system is into the new system of DITA, you're going to need to keep in mind that you're going to encounter new things in the tagging. You're going to find that you're using an element differently than you thought you were originally. And the style sheets, they do not understand what you think it means. They don't say, oh, I think the writer meant to say this, so I'm going to publish this way. The style sheets are very literal, and they go by a very specific set of rules. For example, page break rules are sometimes very, very complex, and there are ways to be able to set it up so that it thinks almost intuitively, but it's not going to be exact, and so those are things that might be tweaked over time. Another set, part of the basic requirements is the content rules. For example, a task step. You might say if there's only one step, you want it styled as a paragraph. But if there are more than one step, you want it styled as a list. Or you might want to reorder your prerequisites and context and use a general task type instead. Additional requirements that are always going to be required are fonts, colors, sizes, and spacing. Another one of our reality checks. Before you start development, the basic formatting should already be decided. I know that it has come across once in a while where a customer has said, okay, well, this is how we think it's going to be. It's pretty much like this, and we might change a couple of things. If that happens, as we have written, it's an invitation for Murphy and Murphy's Law, and it's a recipe for wasted time and budget. It's going to be very frustrating for you if suddenly we say, hey, listen, we have to now redo a lot of this development because this is how we thought it was going to be according to the previous set of requirements. And for a lot of the requirements we will discuss, some details can be resolved during the development process. There are certain elements that you might be using that you didn't know you were going to be using, and that works just as fine for us to be able to work that through, but again, it needs to be accounted for in scheduling and budget. Common requirements for PDF. So for high fidelity or print and online version, You might want to be able to turn off or turn on your talk, your index, your mini talk. In case you're not familiar with the term mini talk, that would be, an example would be if at the top of a chapter it has a list of all the different heading ones that are going to be inside that chapter. You might want to turn on or off your draft comments, crop marks, watermark, or you might want to change markup. You might have different sizes of documents and foldouts. You might have letter size A4, different ones. It might even be based on locale. It might be saying, okay, when we publish in Europe, it's going to go A4. When we publish in North America, it's going to come out as size letter. And you're going to need to know if that there are custom sizes that are for folding, for example. Sometimes you need to put things in a smaller box. We are going to need to know the exact spacing requirements that you need. For variable page size and orientation, you might need to display a single topic, page, table, figure, or in a landscape or a different page size, again, with foldouts or particularly large diagrams. Custom cover and back pages. So you might have a custom cover graphic, and if you do, that's going to be necessary as part of the style sheet development process. You might have titles and alt titles where you have a subtitle underneath, or you might have separate titles. You're going to have things like your serial number, publication date, revision number, different information, part numbers, things like that that you need to include on a PDF. Any copyright information, any legal notices that you're going to need, those are going to be things that we would need to know ahead of time for style sheet also. Contact information, addresses, a lot of companies have that listed in the PDFs also. And most of the time, what those are done using metadata through what we call output classes. Also, we can do automated watermarks, and those are generally done based on metadata combined with, for example, the current date, if that's what you want to have. You want to have something come out as a draft done on January 21st, and it would come through as a watermark. And during our Suite Labs set of webinars, one of our developers did do a webinar called Adding a Watermark to Your PDF Output, and the link is going to be in this document for you to check out if you would like to.
Thanks, Yehudit. I'd like to break in now with a couple of samples based on what you've been saying or been talking about. So I have an example here of some content that I've downloaded from websites for some of our customers. Okay, so you were just speaking about, Yehudit, about cover pages. So here's an example of a cover page where you might have a cover graphic that changes based on the product that you're publishing for. You might have a title that you have a manual name, the revision number, serial number, date of publication, okay, logos, all kinds of front matter information, okay, contact information. And then all the way at the back, you might have some of that information repeated, maybe a barcode, address information that might actually be variable based on the type of content or the product, copy information. So as Yehudit pointed out, a lot of this information needs to be specified not only how it's supposed to look, but how it's going to be coming out of your data, whether it says metadata, output classes, in your data map, etc. These are things that you can work out with your information architect or your vendor, such as we would be able to work out with you as well. Another example of different types of formatting. For example, you mentioned about showing crop marks as opposed to not crop marks. For example, this manual might be printed for print. It may be generated for print as PDF, or may be generated for online access. The same content, same PDF. Okay. We have something called fitting it in the box, meaning that sometimes the content needs to be fitting on a certain page size. And so the content needs to be, or the style sheets need to be able to morph themselves to be able to fit in that page size. Okay, back to you, Yehudit. Yehudit?
Sorry, I was muted. Page breaks and keep with next. This is one of those things that really tends to irritate people. When a writer is used to tweaking, manually doing page breaks, and then suddenly they're not able to tweak them manually. It tends to be very complex, especially if there are elements that span multiple pages. But it really is possible, I mentioned this briefly, that you can build logic into the style sheets that tries to mimic the thought process of an actual author doing manual page breaks. For example, you can say, okay, would I want one bullet hanging onto another page? No, I don't want one bullet page hanging onto another page. Or do I want 2/3 of a page of white space if it's not at the end of a chapter? No. And those are the kinds of things that we can set up in the style sheets. We can even add support for adding page instructions to break in the source DITA. One thing to keep in mind is that there are the different rendering engines, and for Apache FOP, a lot of these things are not supported. It's just not robust enough for complex page breaks and keep with next rules. Table footnotes. Some people might want them to appear exactly after the page and exactly after the table versus at the bottom of the page. Flagging would be based on conditionalization. You could have it set up, for example, that every time you're using product equals Sam, then it'll show up in a certain way. But if you're using product equals George, it's going to show up in a different way. And change tracking. Change tracking can be done via the authoring tool, also by the review tool, and it's possible to do a comparison between two different document revisions.
There's some other PDF requirements that include barcodes and QR codes like we saw before in the other example. Section 508 compliance for accessibility for people who have disabilities. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Basically enabling the PDF to be read by a screen reader. There's antenna house extension to add attributes to the PDF for elements such as links. Showing the tags in the output for review. For example, if you want to have a special draft review where you can actually see the tags that are being used to generate that output, sometimes that's useful for debugging the style sheets or the content. Links between documents. For example, if you're doing PDFs for training and you have an instructor guide and a participant guide, two different guides with slightly different information, but you want the instructor to be able to know what page that content is in the participant guide, right? So you want to publish those together. So those are very interesting requirements that we've come across. MathML is becoming more and more required for equations. You can render those in a PDF using Antenna House. You can render in HTML using by generating graphics. We have a webinar just speaking about this that you can find on our YouTube channel or via our website if you want to learn more about that. As far as the PDF rendering tool, there are a few that you can choose from. And you want to choose a tool that will support all of your requirements. And I've listed a few here, the three major ones, and I've listed them in the order of robustness. So Antenna House is probably the most robust tool. Most of our customers are using that. Most of the CMS engines the CMS tools that we come across integrate with Antenna House out of the box. RenderX is also a fine tool. It's a little bit less expensive. It's also a good tool. Apache FOP is a free tool, which is good if you have a low budget, but as I say, you get what you pay for sometimes. So if you need basic output, Apache FOP usually should be okay. But orphan widows rules, like Yehudit mentioned, page breaks are not supported very well. Antenna House has support for EPSs via GhostScript. I believe RenderX does not have that. They have other extensions available for MathML, barcodes, etc. They have excellent localization support. They also have other specific tools for Japanese sorting, Chinese sorting, other tools for regression testing. Japanese and Chinese sorting, just as an aside, is not based on alphabetization. They're based on the number, or Chinese sort anyway. It's based on the number of strokes inside of a character. It's very hard to do automatically. So Antenna has a good tool for doing that. Some other considerations for localization. Yehudit, I'll let you take over from here.
So the support for localized outputs Localization is generally supported within the DITA OT. There are certain things that are actually even out of the box. One of the things that's not out of the box is multilingual documents. That is, if you want a document that has several different languages inside one document. However, it can be supported. We've even done some where it has many different ones, and based on the fold of the piece of paper, the different languages are going to show. And when the style sheets are done correctly, you really only do one set of style sheets, and it covers all of the languages. For customization of localization, one of the things to keep in mind is font usage. When you're starting to do style sheets, you may start to think to yourself, well, I don't need so many different fonts. But the fact is that certain languages need to have different kinds of fonts, and it's going to change according to the character set. And you can automate right to left versus left to right for headers, footers, covers, and margins. For formatting, use alternatives for emphasizing text in languages that don't use italics, bold, or quotes. For example, some languages consider, like Japanese, does not use italicized text, so they often use brackets. For some Chinese, they don't use italicized text, so they use double carets, or for bolded text, they might put them in quotes. And there are different things like displaying the dates in a particular format, like the example shown here. Variable strings. Text that's static throughout the content but varies per language. Examples are when you have the words table of contents. If you want it in English, you want it in Japanese, you want it in French, those are the kinds of strings that are included. The DITA OT actually already includes many of the most commonly used ones, the different kinds of notes, the talk, the index, glossary, things like that. But if you have special things that you want to add in, special elements or special situations where you've got copyright, address, special headings, those, etc., then those are the kinds of strings that you're going to need to supply to the style sheet developer. Index and glossary sort. Chinese and Japanese actually don't sort alphabetically because they don't use the same kind of alphabet to be able to do them. So they have different options. One would be to use an index sort as or a glossary sort as to manually specify and sort and group orders where they would sort of chunk them. And then there's also a possibility to use antenna house to sort module, which automates the sort instead of having to do it more manually. Again, I mentioned earlier, page size can be based on the locale. So you can say when it's going to use this language, then in this language it should be in this size paper. And the page size also affects the placement of headers, footers, margins, and back covers. So if you know that certain translated strings are going to be much longer, those are the kinds of things that need to be taken into account for headers and footers and margins.
Now let's switch to discussing about graphics and media. So there's different types of graphics that you might have inside of your outputs. Often folks will will create the graphics in Adobe Illustrator or other types of tools that allow you to have both high-res graphics and low-res graphics. Often what you can do is store the high-res graphics, EPSs for example, and have that published through your tool set. And then those EPSs can be supported using antenna house plus GhostStrike to publish that inside the PDF. When you're working with HTML, we'll talk about HTML a little bit later on, but while we're on the subject, you can also do an automated conversion during publishing from that EPS to other formats, for example, PNG. So the idea is you're able to keep one source format and then use the tool set to automatically publish or automatically generate the graphics that you need for the output. Some customers are considering whether to use SVG. SVG is a graphic format that's actually based on XML. It's often used for graphics that have callouts in it. And since it's an XML file, that text in there is easier to localize. There are some caveats. For example, if you have text that needs to be translated into languages that are a little bit longer than English, for example, like German or other types of languages, you need to be careful about that. It also allows you to change the text inside the graphics during publishing time. Later on we may get to a case study that will show you how that actually can work. for a real live requirement. And those SVGs also can be automatically converted to other formats during publishing time, for example, PNG. Some browsers support SVG and some browsers do not. So generally we recommend, and this you might want to think about this as a requirement, to automatically convert those SVGs into PNGs. A lot of folks are asking about embedding links to video. That's definitely a possibility and something you should be considering as part of your requirements. Sizing your graphics for HTML outputs. Generally, your HTML might have a smaller graphic than the PDF. You can either automatically generate the smaller graphics using Toolset, like we mentioned about before, a similar type of Toolset that we use to generate PNGs from EPSs. You can also automatically generate smaller graphics, or you can rely on the CSS, which is a style sheet, which is a little bit easier to implement. The problem is that the CSS, the sizing is controlled by the browser, and sometimes there's less quality. So you want to think about that as far as your requirements. If you need a high level of resolution or quality for your graphic, you might not want to rely on the CSS or the browser. Thumbnails. Customers are asking us sometimes if they want to have a thumbnail inside the HTML, especially for larger figures, graphs, charts, or wiring diagrams, etc. They want to have a smaller thumbnail, and when you click on it, automatically displays a larger rendition with an overlay. Sometimes you can actually pan through that graphic using certain types of controls. You want to think about that during your requirements also. If you have graphics that are large, that you want to become readable, if you have different technicians who need to see larger, like parts catalogs or wiring diagrams, you want to think about that as your requirements as well. Let's talk a little bit about HTML. So HTML, kind of branching out from PDF, or for print over online over to HTML. HTML is used for a variety of formats, whether it be for online help, whether it be for your mobile delivery, whether it's used for creating EPUBs is also based on HTML. Knowledge bases, other systems like Salesforce, Jive, other types of enterprise systems use HTML as an input for display. So general requirements for HTML is broad because there's a lot of different types of formats that can be based on HTML. But in general, just like we spoke about with a PDF, you want to get your formatting, font sizes, spacing down pat for the particular platform that you're going to be delivering to. Figures and tables, numbering for the figures and tables not the same as the for print. I mean, usually for manual you'll have figure and table numbering through the chapter or through the entire book. That's not the default for HTML, and generally it's not something you want to do for HTML. Often your users will be finding one topic either on your website or in your help. Numbering that started from someplace in the manual and ends somewhere else is not really so relevant. So generally numbering makes sense on a per topic level, and that's generally what we recommend, either to do a per topic or just to turn off the numbering and only display the title. The titles of the figures and tables can be displayed either above or below, something you want to think about. Cell spanning, first row color, these are things you want to think about for your tables. Flagging based on conditionalization. So for example, if you're using additional tags, you want to see, during your QA, you want to be able to see how the text is conditionalized to make sure everything is going to come out properly when you publish for different renditions of the same content for the reuse. You can set the flagging in your style sheets to turn that on and off based on whether you're doing testing or for production. Again, also draft comments. If you want to put your content through review, you can turn on your draft comments. For production, they would be turned off. So you want to make sure the draft comments are formatted properly, either in red or some kind of format that makes them stand out for the reviewer. You also want to be able to view those on demand, not for production. Embedding Google Analytics code. More and more people are using metrics or analytics software to try to figure out who's accessing their HTML content or their website content, knowledge-based content. Mark of the web is an old vestige of older Windows and IE systems. It's less of an issue today, but if you need to support older Windows and older IEs, you want to make sure this is part of your requirements. General considerations for HTML5. HTML5 is, in essence, really the latest buzzword. It has some features, and the features are important. I don't want to downgrade that, but essentially HTML5 is more of a buzzword than anything else. The issue and the challenge is that current browsers are not supporting fully HTML5. So you want to consider, first of all, which features you really want. and consider implementing fallback options when there are differences in support for between different browsers, different operating systems. Okay, so you want to check that those features are supported in the required browsers, and you need to test it. You need to test it in different operating systems, different browsers, different versions of browsers, different devices. Semantic elements is something relatively new in HTML5. Article, header, footer, etc. These are sometimes used by certain search engines to trying to determine which content should be is more important, etc. So if you're talking about your requirements for HTML5 and pushing your content from instead of XHTML to be using HTML5, you want to think about using these semantic elements. Video is a big, people are talking about video, and that's a real nice feature to be able to show videos inside of your content. Unfortunately, it's not supported by some browsers. You have to be careful about that. It still generally requires some support for JavaScript APIs for embedding those controls. You need to consider the video encoding and how those encodings are supported in different browsers. For example, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, they all support something called WebM. Safari and IE only support H.264, which is actually what we generally recommend. Microdata attributes in HTML5, those are generally used for search weighting. And that's something, if you're going to use them, then if you're going to use them, you want to make sure that your search engine is going to actually use them. If your search engine is not going to use them, then you're wasting your time. We spoke a little bit before about Section 508 compliance. That's for allowing better accessibility to people with disabilities. The list of regulations you can see here in the link. When you get access to the slides, you can click on the link and you'll be able to get to the full list of regulations. But a big example of that is making sure, for example, that all the alt attributes inside images are populated. So for example, if someone can't see the image, the screen reader will read the alternate title for that image. Okay. Now generally that alt content comes from your XML, which basically means that if you're going to have a requirement that those alt attributes get filled in, you need to make sure they're going to be being filled in by your authors. Some of those alts can be filled in automatically, for example, logos and note icons and things like that. Web pages should be designed also that all information is conveyed with color, should be available without the color. Okay, so don't rely that someone can be able to see a color and understand what you're saying. Another challenge is that HTML5 compliance is not in jive really with, or not 100% synced up with Section 508. So for example, Section 508 says that it requires the summary tag, whereas in HTML5 that summary tag is being deprecated. So you want to keep an eye out for things like this. Now we're going to talk about choosing an online help platform. We mentioned that HTML can be used for different platforms. HTML Online Help is definitely one of them. The platforms available generally are HTML Help. A lot of people are familiar with those. Generally, folks are going away from HTML Help. A lot of your developers might say, I like HTML Help. We know our application can use it. We already know how this context sensitivity works. Problem is it only works on Windows. It's not cross-platform. It's not server-enabled. There's not so much customization available. It's not supported by Microsoft anymore. It doesn't support modern CSS, which it gives you challenges if you want to reuse the work that you're doing in your style sheets between different help systems. So you should really try as much as possible to go away from CHM, away from HTML help. Some other platforms for web help available: Sweet Help, that's produced and supported by us, by Sweet Solutions. Oxygen has a nice online help platform. WebWorks, Flare, RoboHelp. Eclipse is something that was being used more in the past. People are moving away from Eclipse. I'm not going to focus on that too much. Other considerations about choosing an online help platform: again, browser support, the big four, IE, Firefox, Chrome, Safari. IE is very difficult to support older versions without a lot of workarounds. So if you can get away from it, try to get away from it. Support for different operating systems. You have to think about Windows, Mac, Linux. If you're going to have a nice help system with advanced search that's going to run like a light server, either on a web server or even on a client, so you want to make sure that's going to be able to run on Linux, maybe even Macintosh. The online help platform should not be based on frames. Frames is how we used to do web help. It's deprecated in HTML5. It causes more and more security problems in more browsers. It's slow and it's not mobile friendly. Because you want to keep away from online help that's using frames. Context sensitivity is something you want to consider. Most, or I say a lot of online help systems do support context sensitivity. Some say they do. but actually implementing is a little bit difficult. You really want to check that and make sure that the cost sensitivity was going to fit your requirements. Quality of search is a big issue. I'm going to brush on it. I'm going to touch on it now. The search engines can either be based on JavaScript, which are usually light and they can be deployed on the client, versus server-based, which are much more robust, and they generally can provide true phrase search, morphology, fuzzy search, Boolean search, etc. Some web helps say that they support phrase search. It's not really phrase search, maybe one or two words together. It's not really the same. So if you want a really powerful search, you want to do a server-based web help. Other types of things, search and highlighting snippets, things like that. Other things to consider, talk images, whether you want an index, whether you want a glossary. Alphabetization of the glossary can be done. It can be automated. We've done that for a number of customers. Grouping is more difficult, so if you really need grouping, that's something you need to think about. Which types of links to generate, whether you need parent and child links, next and previous links, related links, how you want the related links to be grouped, whether by topic type or grouped all together. Breadcrumbs, these are things that you want to think about how you want to customize them. Don't assume that you chose a web help platform and then everything is, a lot of this can be out of the box. You really need to think about how you want each thing to be laid out. Other types of features that are available these days, printing current topic, etc. Emailing a link of the current topic, creating a link to the PDF version of the manual, resizing the navigation pane, custom footers, custom home pages. Okay, these are things that you want to think about for your customizing your online help. And I just realized that I went through Yehudit's slides. I'm sorry about that, Yehudit. I'm going to pass forward about the EPUB. General requirements for EPUB. The formatting for EPUB is much more limited than in other formats. It has many quirks. I'm going to show you an EPUB now. To give you an idea of what it looks like. Should be seeing on your screen shortly. EPUB. Okay, this is an EPUB that I downloaded to my computer. You would not normally see it this way on your using this reader on a mobile device. But I want to show you what it looks like. It's based in HTML, but you can see there's the formatting is pretty plain. Okay, and there's not a whole lot you can do with that. Okay, one thing you want to think about also, which I actually didn't put in the slides, but the way that tables are laid out. If you have long, wide tables, they're not going to show up on the mobile device. They're not going to show up in EPUB. So either you have to make sure not to use wide tables, or make sure that they're going to be not viewed in your EPUB using output classes. Or there are ways to take wide tables and to render them differently using either nested lists, etc. So there are different methods for getting around this issue if you really need them. Go back to the slides. So again, the challenge for EPUB is generating HTML, but it's presented like a book. Topic chunking. Generally, you'll chunk your help so that each topic forms one HTML file. But in EPUB, sometimes you're not going to want that. You're going to want different topics or a number of topics to flow together. You want to set the chunking rules either in the style sheets or in your maps. Cover page, what you want the cover page to look like. It's very important to think about which EPUB readers you're going to be supporting. Different readers on different platforms differ very widely in their support for CSS. Okay, Kindle, if you want to support Kindle, that's a different format. It's called Mobi. You can reuse a lot of the work you did for EPUB, but you need to realize it's a different format. So if you go to your vendor and say, I want EPUB, don't assume that you're getting Kindle also. So you want to think about that. Again, a reality check, you need to test on all the different devices and readers that you want to support. There are common readers, such as DITA for Android, but you want to try to find out what the common readers are for the different devices you want to support, whether it be iPhone or iOS, Windows, Android, etc. The whole question of responsive versus adaptive design. You probably heard those words thrown around. So a responsive design is generally where the help or the HTML can automatically refit itself using CSS to optimize the usability based on the size of the device. Okay, so you actually can see that the whole HTML will look completely different based on the size of the device. And that's a function of the CSS and it requires a little bit more work, design work for the CSS. Adaptive design is where the help or the HTML set or the mobile set is designed for a particular range of sizes. So if the help or the platform notices or recognizes that the user is using a certain size device, it will automatically view a whole different rendition of the help. Okay, so again, the considerations are which device sizes you need to support, which OS. Are you publishing for tablets? Are you publishing for a proprietary device that your company is putting out? Are most of your customers going to be using their cell phone? Are they consumers? Or are they the technicians, etc.? HTML5 versus native app, it's a whole bowl of wax we're not going to get into, but that's definitely a consideration. A lot of companies say, must get an app, but more and more people are finding that you can do just as good without paying for a native app and going through the hassle of getting that app published and deployed using Apple or Apple Store or whatever. Talk navigation is generally a little bit different from mobile. jQuery Mobile is a responsive UI system that's commonly used. It supports out-of-the-box different sizes without the concern for media queries in those grids. So I'm going to show you an example of that. Yeah. I'm showing this in my browser, but if I put the browser smaller, you can see what it would look like for a mobile device. And you'll see that something you kind of recognize, that the table of contents generally only has one level. And once you press with your finger on one level, it brings you down to the content, and then you can navigate down to the lower levels. And generally, this navigation is either at the top or the bottom of the content, however you like it. Okay. Now I'll go back to the slides. Okay, gestures, swiping, pinching, zoom, plan graphics, those are things you want to consider. Some of the things come out of the box with jQuery, some of them don't. If you need your graphics to be panning or zooming, you're using different types of graphics, you need to be cognizant of that and ask for that. Searching, also if you're hosting your mobile content on a server, which most people do, then it gives you the possibility of implementing a much more powerful search engine than with other types of output. Embedding videos is more and more of a requirement. You want to think about that. Again, not all media is supported out of the box. We spoke about that before. Now, we've talked a lot about different types of formats and different types of information architecture and your style sheets. Now, just like you need that, a lot of you guys, you document your products and document your software, then you really should go ahead and document your style sheets. Okay, all the output classes and the parameters and all the stuff and all the pyrotechnics that you're using to get the right outputs, that should be documented. I'm going to give you an example of some documentation that we do for our customers. Okay, so for example, we go and we document all the different output class values. Okay, if you have an output class value that for the cover page, where the graphic is supposed to be, which image where it's supposed to be, if you have different types of alternate titles, where it's supposed to be, if it's a book type or the product version, subtitles, whether you want to have manual page breaks, okay, inside if you want to force a page break inside of your format, okay, whether you want to automatically produce some of the content, whether it be a particular topic or a table or a graphic, produce that in landscape, in full page view. These are all types of things that you can get out of your outputs, okay? But you need to document them so your authors know how to use them. Okay, similar with all kinds of different parameters about whether to control indexing, what level of talk, whether to have a title page or not, which type of notes, all these type of things you might want to think about your the different flexibility that your outlets might need to have if you want to document those things. Back to the slides. Okay, we have a couple minutes. I want to show a couple of some advanced stuff, just to kind of get your imagination going. So a list of affected pages is a way of, it's kind of an advanced change tracking. Let me show you how that works. One example of that. So for example, you'll see a PDF here where it's not just showing the change bars, but you can actually show a list of in the beginning of the manual of all the different pages and whether they've changed and which change. So for example, if you have change 1 or revision 1 of your document, revision 2, etc., you can show the users which pages have changed. And all these types of lists are created automatically. using the toolset. Another thing I'd like to show you, and we talked about localization, okay, and we talked about people saying, well, you can't get everything out of DITA. So we have customers who are doing very sophisticated stuff, getting very good formatting out of DITA. Okay, these are multilingual foldouts, okay, generated out of DITA. The same content can be going to a manual that's 8.5 by 11 or A4 that's spread out differently in different languages, or you can take the same content and push it to a format like this. Okay, so all this is definitely a possibility. Here's another example. Okay, a little bit. Okay, we'll go back to the slides. I spoke a little while ago about using SVG. The SVG, since it's graphic, there's text inside the SVG as text, so you can do a lot of cool things with that. Let's say you have graphics that need to change based on where you're publishing that. For example, sometimes in this example, there's graphics for different standards commissions where you need to have a serial number, whatever it is. So you can actually have that text change depending on how you're publishing that. Okay, so that's something you can consider. Rebranding. Sometimes a lot of customers are rebranding their online help for OEM. They have OEM partners. You can rebrand on help. You can have different, slightly different or widely different style sheets or formatting, and change that format, how it's going to look, based on metadata or based on a control inside of your map. Okay, the next level, and we're kind of running out of time. The next level to think about is dynamic web. We have some webinars. We've spoken about this in the past, and we'll be speaking about it more in the future. But having more advanced platforms for a variety of content, better filtering, personalized documentation, allowing users to create their own documents and publish that to PDF and EPUB. That's the wave of the future, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that in the future. I'm going to turn it back over to Herzl. We'll wrap it up.
Okay, Joe and Yehudit, thank you very much. We just have one unanswered question. Kristen asked earlier on, are there any metrics for about a length of time for testing in relation to X amount of content? Either one of you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I don't have any metrics like that, but it's something we can start thinking about. Thanks for asking the question.
Okay. All right, so that's it for the questions. We're open to receiving questions via email, so if you think of anything later, please send the questions to us. We'll be happy to answer you. Anyway, thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you found this presentation enjoyable and informative. Please stay tuned for our next DITA Quick Start webinar, which will be Migrating to DITA, Defining Your Conversion Requirements. If you found this webinar helpful, please take a moment to follow us on LinkedIn. All right, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Joe and Yehudit, for a very interesting presentation. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.